The ocean is an incredible place. Let's keep it that way. Join us as we hunt for sustainable seafood. Our seafood choices matter for the future of ocean health. Hey, it's Sarah Curry from Soraya Films. In this episode, I'm meeting up with Nicolette Mariano in Sebastian, Florida, to learn about her oyster farm, Treasure Coast Shellfish. Oysters are amazing and delicious creatures. They're one of the best proteins you can eat if you care about the environment. Almost all of the world's wild oyster beds have collapsed. But here on the east coast of Florida, in what was historically one of the most biologically diverse estuaries in North America, the Indian River Lagoon is home to an oyster farm. This farm is improving the quality of the water in the area and provides a local, sustainable protein that people love to eat. The subtidal area where the oyster farm is located receives pulses of salt water twice a day as the tide changes. And Nicolette Mariano, a young aquaculture biologist, is doing what few people have done here.
Right now we're coming up to a cage that has our staged gold doubloons. So we'll grab it with a gaff first to help pull us to the boat and not slip. And then we'll grab the hook and use the davit to pull it up, so it's a lot easier on our backs.
There are 5 species of oyster that are commonly grown in North America, and multiple ways to grow these different oysters. Nicolette is growing her delicious Atlantic or East Coast oysters in floating cages. Each line has 14 cages on it, and each cage holds 4 bags of oysters. And even though she grows one species, she divides them up into 2 different size classes in the bags.
So our Sebastian silvers are 2.5 to 2 3/4 inches long. I say it's a play on our petite, because you don't really hear of a petite oyster in the southern market. And then the gold doubloons are 3 to 3.5 inches. That's our larger oyster. On average, our salinity is year-round roughly about 28 parts per thousand. We've been having a higher salinity. The gold doubloons are briny all the way through, and the silvers are briny up front with a green and a little bit of a sweeter finish.
Water conditions, such as how salty the water is or salinity, impact the taste of the oysters. This is why it's fun to try oysters from different water bodies.
You can hear by the sound, or if it's a oyster that's leaking, it sounds a little more hollow, or if it's completely dead, whether there's still meat in there or it's just an empty shell, it sounds hollow, kind of like jingly. Right now we're counting out and bagging up our Sebastian silvers, which is a smaller petite oyster, into 100 count bags. A good market oyster has a nice deep cup and a really good meat to shell ratio. So trying to have that meat close to the edge of the shell. So if you're buying a 3-inch oyster, you're not just gonna have 1 or 2 inches of meat. Hopefully you'll have a full 3 inches-ish of meat. And that is all with working the oysters, chipping that growth edge. So yeah, as you can see, the growth lips on these ones, or we also call it the feather edge. When you're through the tumbler, or like sometimes we'll shake the bag, the growth edge gets chipped, so you're creating this nice deep cup oyster versus like this one still has a cup on it, but it's got a backward bend and it's thinner. Because you want that nice deep cup to sit nicely on the plate to hold the liquid inside the oyster. 2, 3, 4. It is hard work, and working out in Mother Nature, I mean, it's been cold, it's been hot, it's been rainy. I've always wanted to build a crew that, we're tight-knit, just like a family. Being able to mesh well with the crew and each other is important.
We've started to harvest the same seed that we got when I first started working here. And that has been really, really cool for me to see. I think anyone in agriculture, aquaculture will tell you that, to be able to raise something from essentially almost when it was born or just a few days old to being market sized and sold off. Yeah, it's a really rewarding experience.
I love my coworkers. They're great. And I just love being on the water and being able to be out here every day. Every time I come out here, it's just like an immediate mood booster. And I just love being out here, being in the sun, being with everybody, just being able to do what we do.
We are the farmer, and we also are the certified processor. We do retail and wholesale. I mean, everyone's our target consumer, but definitely trying to debunk that misconception that southern oysters you can only eat during the winter months. We're not back in the icebox days. We have very good refrigerations in our processing facilities, and we are very highly regulated.
Myths about the safety of southern oysters are pervasive and can harm the livelihoods of farmers like Nicolette. Though there may be risk in eating raw oysters, there's risk in eating any food product that's been mishandled. From near constant temperature monitoring to site visits by inspectors, oysters are so strictly regulated that these risks are drastically reduced. Here in Florida, the group in charge of implementing and enforcing regulations to meet federal shellfish guidelines is the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. I spoke to Jesse Field from FDACS to learn more about these regulations.
It is the most regulated food item in this country other than milk. Once it's at the processor, before it leaves that processor, it should be under 50 degrees and it should be stored at 45 degrees or below for its entire life until consumption. Starting in May through September, all product must be in the cooler by 11 a.m. and it must be down to under 55 degrees before 1 p.m. or within 2 hours of when it was put in the cooler.
We are very fortunate with our location that our processing facility is only about a 10-minute drive to the dock. And then from the dock out to the farm is only another 10, 15 minutes.
An inspection happens 4 times a year, and it involves a site walkthrough and a paperwork review. We want to basically see your records of what has happened in your facility since the last time we were here. And that's going to cover sort of the temperatures of your coolers. It's going to cover all of your sanitation of your facility. It's going to cover all of your receiving and sales records. In this case, all of your temperatures are consistently 40 or below. At least once every 90 days, 4 times a year, you have to verify that your thermometer is accurate. Our requirement is at least every 90 days. If you do it once a month, that's absolutely acceptable to do it more often than required.
Born and raised in Stuart, Florida. The house I was actually born at was on the water. Going out on the boat, fishing, learning about all the different organisms within the Indian River Lagoon estuary. Definitely a byproduct of the Environmental Studies Center with camp and volunteering. What's primarily changed is there's been a significant decrease in the seagrass beds, and the seagrass is extremely important for this type of estuary because that's where everything from finfish to crustaceans pup their babies. So with the decrease of the seagrass, for the juvenile organisms, they don't have anywhere to hide before they can protect themselves. So it's been really interesting to see with our floating cages out on the farm and even our floating bags and the pods in the nurseries, the organisms that come in to spawn and have babies, everything from stone crabs to blue crabs, sheep's head, snapper. We've even found some juvenile baby spiny lobsters out on the farm, which is really cool, and bay scallops. We've been fortunate enough to work with some of the local clam farmers to be able to rent some nursery land-based systems so we can get smaller seed. Just like you get tomato seed or corn seed, we buy seed as well.
Nicolette buys seed when it's small in order to save money, and they'll spend 2 to 3 months here on land before moving to the floating bags beside the dock. This whole time they're feeding on algae from the water, but if there's not enough rain, there won't be enough algae for the oysters to eat. And once they're in the open water, they're subject to different environmental threats.
Mother Nature is our biggest business partner, and there's no negotiating with her, so we just gotta roll with the punches. So with the floating bags, as you can see, they're not as robust as the oyster cages. And if you take a closer look, you can see that the oysters are still partially in the water. So they're not gonna get a good desiccation or a good air dry. So then they'll still be prone to predation. Boring sponge is a big problem with our waters. Yeah, this wild oyster was very infested with boring sponge.
Everyday farmed oysters face predation from boring sponges, whelks, crabs, and other critters. In an effort to control this, farmers mimic tidal changes and air dry the oysters by rocking the cages and flipping them. They do this here at the nearshore nursery and once they're in the grow-out cages. In addition to working the cages to control predators, the farmers also sort the oysters based on size so that they grow more efficiently. From seed to plate, the whole process can take a year to a year and a half, with the farmers tending to the oysters daily. And after the harvest, it takes attention to detail and experience to maintain a fresh product.
The biggest key to shellfish traceability in Florida and in the entire country, and honestly throughout the international shellfish shipping community, is tagging. Blue Trace is a company who is sort of making a move in the traceability field. They have these essentially small printers that you can actually take out either in your processor or out on your boat, and they will print the shellfish tags on demand with the information that's supposed to be on them. They're trying to make it where you could scan a QR code and it would immediately tell you every processor who's had this product since it was harvested.
As a consumer at a restaurant, no matter what oyster you order, you have the right to ask for the harvest tag. And I suggest that you do, because you don't know when that oyster was harvested. And if the restaurant can't provide that or refuses to provide that for you, that's illegal from a consumer standpoint. I like to keep our harvest time to delivery very short because we are so close to our farm. I don't like keeping product in our cooler. So from the time we harvest until the time it's picked up or delivered is typically within 24 or 48 hours. We got the truck temperature, and then we'll write down, I'll go in the cooler temperature, and then the internal product temperature as well.
Recently we found Nicolette, made a connection. I went to her farm and saw what kind of operation she had. So we knew right away we were dealing with a professional. So we're a distributor of high-end protein and seafood, specializing in serving restaurants, hotels throughout the Southeast. As a fishmonger, we're always looking for boutique items, new items, and now we are getting the Sebastian Silvers. The salty flavor, the nice sweet finish, we've been selling them ever since. Our customers love them. We have high standards with our receiving process. Everything is done internally. We temp check them immediately. Our standards are higher than the federal regulations. You will not receive anything that's over 39 degrees.
There's only a few restaurants so far in South Florida that serve these local gems. And Over Under in downtown Miami is one of them. We followed Nicolette's oysters into the kitchen to meet Chef James.
These we got from Nicolette last week. They were harvested, I think, 2 days before we get them. So we're very fortunate. We go through them fairly quick, so we're not really sitting on them for too long. They're salty, they're a little meaty. They have a really nice balance of fatty oyster to salt. Shuck them to order, lay them out on ice, and then we kind of just serve them with a little hot sauce and lime.
These oysters are as good as they get. Nicolette also hand delivers oysters to seafood markets in Sebastian, where customers are thrilled to have a year-round local oyster option. Everyone in the seafood supply chain is committed to a safe oyster for the consumer. But unless we as consumers show up to support farmers like these farms won't exist. It's hard to find a local, delicious, and environmentally beneficial protein. So we want these farms to survive. For us, and for the environment.